The inspector gave him 24 hours to fix the elevator brake, or shut the whole line down. Sable Prentice had $8, a duffel bag with a set of hand tools she'd carried since her last steady job on a grain elevator maintenance crew, and a habit of checking any elevator leg mechanism she passed for signs of proper operation. A habit that had led her, more than once that year, to exactly the kind of forgotten equipment that kept her fed for a few weeks at a stretch. She was 22 years old, laid off 9 months earlier, when the regional co-op that employed her consolidated its maintenance operations into a single traveling crew, eliminating every dedicated local position along the way. She had been moving through farm country ever since, taking whatever short-term work she could find. The consolidation notice had cited operational efficiency as its justification, language Sable had come to recognize across 9 months of towns exactly like this one as the specific corporate dialect for deciding that a technician's actual familiarity with a particular facility's specific safety systems mattered less than whatever a traveling crew could theoretically manage across several counties instead. She had grown up around exactly this kind of heavy equipment her whole life, her own father having maintained grain elevator machinery for nearly 3 decades before her, and she had learned, riding along on his service calls from an early age, the particular gravity of safety systems specifically, understanding that a brake mechanism's failure wasn't simply an inconvenience, but a genuine risk to anyone working near a loaded elevator leg. She arrived at the grain elevator outside Hartwell Station on an ordinary Tuesday morning, drawn by the sight of a state safety inspector's vehicle parked beside the loading dock and a foreman pacing anxiously nearby, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying the particular strain of a man delivering news he desperately wished he didn't have to deliver. "I understand the severity, sir," the foreman said into the phone. "We'll have this addressed within the day. I promise you that." He ended the call and stood there a moment, staring at the elevator's main leg mechanism with an expression of genuine alarm. "Rough morning?" Sable asked, approaching carefully. The foreman turned, startled. "You could say that. Name's Otis Kavanaugh. The state inspector just found a critical failure in our leg brake system, the mechanism that keeps the loaded bucket elevator from free-falling if the drive motor loses power. He's given us 24 hours to fix it properly, or he's shutting down the entire operation, effective immediately. This elevator serves 11 farms across this county. A shutdown doesn't just cost us money. It leaves 11 harvests with nowhere to go, right in the middle of the season." "What exactly failed?" Sable asked. "The brake's own emergency engagement mechanism," Otis said. "Inspector says it's worn to the point of unreliability, meaning if the drive motor actually lost power during operation, the brake might not engage properly, and the whole loaded leg would freefall. He's not wrong to flag it. I just don't know how we fix something this critical in 24 hours, particularly given our own maintenance contractor can't get anyone out here before Thursday at the earliest." "How long has this elevator been running without a proper safety inspection?" Sable asked. "Longer than it should have," Otis admitted. "Budget's been tight these past few years, and safety inspections kept getting pushed back in favor of whatever repair seemed most urgent at the time. I don't think anyone intended to let a critical system like this one go unaddressed this long. It simply happened, the way these things sometimes do, one deferred inspection at a time. I used to do exactly this kind of elevator maintenance," Sable said. "I'd need to see the brake mechanism directly before I could tell you honestly whether 24 hours is actually possible, but I've fixed worse in less time when the situation demanded it." Otis studied her a long moment, the particular desperate calculation of a man with nothing left to lose by trying. "I don't have much authority to offer beyond whatever the co-op can pay for emergency repair work," he said, "but if you can actually fix this before that inspector returns tomorrow morning, I'll make certain you're compensated properly, whatever it takes." Sable climbed into the elevator's mechanism housing and examined the brake system methodically. understanding that a systematic diagnosis would matter enormously given how much safety margin the repair actually needed to restore. She checked the mechanism's major components in sequence, understanding that a rushed inspection risked missing exactly the detail that would matter most once actual repairs began. She found the problem within the hour. The brake's primary engagement spring had weakened considerably with age, no longer providing sufficient force to fully engage the mechanism's friction surface during an emergency stop. A failure mode exactly as serious as the inspector had described. "This is fixable," Sable told Otis, climbing back down, wiping grease from her hands with a rag she'd found in the mechanism housing. "I'll need a replacement spring of the correct specification, considerable time to properly disassemble and reassemble the brake housing, and I'll want to test it thoroughly before I trust it to actually hold under real load conditions. That's not a quick repair, even working as fast as safely possible. We've got some spare parts in the maintenance shed," Otis said, "though I couldn't tell you whether anything matches what a brake system this specific actually requires." They searched the shed together and found, among considerable clutter, a spring that appeared close to the correct specification. Though Sable determined she'd need to verify its exact tension rating before trusting it under the brake's actual operating conditions, she examined several other candidates as well, understanding that the shed's disorganized inventory might contain something even more suitable if she took the time to look properly rather than settling for the first plausible option. "This one," Sable said finally, holding up a spring she'd found near the back of a dusty shelf. "The coil spacing matches what I'd expect for this brake specification considerably more closely than anything else here. I don't have a way to properly test this spring's tension rating out here," Sable said. "I'll need to calculate it manually, based on the mechanism's known requirements, and verify the fit carefully once it's installed." Sable spent the following hours working through the brake housing's disassembly with careful, methodical attention, understanding that a critical safety mechanism demanded considerably more caution than speed, however much the deadline pressed against both. She calculated the replacement spring's required tension using the brake's own engineering specifications, found stamped into the housing itself, cross-referencing her math twice before trusting the installation to proceed. Otis hovered nearby through most of the day, alternating between offering whatever assistance he could provide and pacing anxiously as the 24 hours continued their steady advance. "I called every farmer who depends on this elevator this morning," he told Sable around midday. "Wanted them to understand what we're facing rather than simply announcing a shutdown without warning if it comes to that." "How did they take it?" Sable asked. "Better than I expected," Otis said. "A few of them offered to come help however they could, though I'm not certain what use farmers without mechanical training would actually be for a repair this specific. Extra hands are rarely useless," Sable said, "even if their usefulness looks different than skilled labor. Send them over if they're willing. I might need help holding components steady at minimum." By late afternoon, with the replacement spring properly installed and the brake housing reassembled, Sable began the careful process of testing the mechanism, running it through repeated engagement cycles under increasing simulated load, watching for any sign the repair hadn't fully restored the safety margin the inspector's original finding had identified. "I need this to actually hold under real emergency conditions, not just pass a light test," Sable explained to Otis, who had grown increasingly anxious as evening approached with the repair still not fully verified. A brake that fails during an actual emergency costs considerably more than simply missing tomorrow's deadline. 3 farmers arrived that evening, a man named Delmar Osi and his 2 grown sons among them, having heard through Otis's own calls that help was welcome, and Sable put them to work assisting with the mechanism's final adjustment and cleanup, understanding that even unskilled hands considerably sped the process when properly directed. "This elevator's the only reason my own farm doesn't require a 2-hour drive to move grain anywhere useful," Delmar told Sable, watching her work the brake housing's stubborn bolts loose. "Whatever you need holding steady, we're here for as long as it takes." By 9 that evening, with the brake system holding steady through repeated full-load simulation tests, Sable finally trusted the repair completely, rather than merely hoping it would pass the inspector's review the following morning. She ran one additional cycle beyond what strict verification required, understanding that her own confidence mattered as much as the mechanism's actual performance when facing an inspector the following day. "It's holding," she told Otis. "I want to run it through one more full cycle in the morning, before the inspector arrives, just to be certain nothing shifted overnight. But I believe this repair genuinely restores the safety margin that failed." The inspector arrived precisely at 9 the following morning, a methodical man named Harold Voss, who examined the brake mechanism with the particular thoroughness of someone who had clearly flagged serious violations before and had no intention of accepting a hasty patch job as adequate. He carried his own testing equipment, unwilling to rely solely on the elevator's existing gauges, and worked through his inspection checklist with a deliberate pace that made every minute feel considerably longer than the clock actually measured. "This spring isn't the original manufacturer specification," Voss said, examining the replacement closely, running his own gloved finger along its coils. "It's not," Sable said, keeping her own voice steady despite a night without much sleep. "But it's properly rated for the required tension, and I've tested the engagement mechanism repeatedly under full simulated load. I'd welcome you to test it yourself, rather than simply taking my word for it." Voss tested the brake thoroughly, running the mechanism through multiple emergency engagement cycles, measuring the actual stopping force against the safety standard his original inspection had cited. Otis stood beside Sable through the entire process, his hands clasped tightly enough that his knuckles had gone pale, watching each test with the particular held breath of someone whose entire operation hung on the results. "This is holding considerably better than what I found yesterday," Voss said finally, closing his own inspection binder. "I'm passing this repair. The elevator can resume normal operation." Otis's relief was visible and immediate, his whole posture finally releasing the tension he'd carried through the entire ordeal. 24 hours, and 11 Farms' entire harvest just avoided sitting with nowhere to go, he said. "I don't know how to properly thank you for what you just did for this county." "I think this county's own farmers deserve considerable credit too," Sable said. "They showed up to help without being asked, the moment they understood what was actually at stake." Word of the near shutdown and its narrow resolution spread through Hartwell Station within days, and the co-op's own board, once informed of exactly how close 11 Farms had come to losing their harvest window over aging safety equipment nobody had properly budgeted to replace, agreed to fund a full mechanical overhaul of the elevator's safety systems, ensuring no future inspection could threaten the operation on such short notice again. The co-op's regional director visited the elevator personally the following week, reviewing the emergency repair alongside Otis's own account of the ordeal, and left visibly troubled by exactly how narrow the margin had actually been. 24 hours, and no backup plan beyond hoping a stranger happened to be passing through with the right skills, the director said, examining the rebuilt brake housing with evident discomfort at his own organization's oversight. "I don't think this co-op fully understood the risk we were carrying on aging safety equipment, until we very nearly learned it the hard way." Sable stayed on at the elevator through that harvest season, and the ones that followed, formally hired to serve as the facility's dedicated maintenance technician, a position that gave her steady work and the particular satisfaction of preventing future crises rather than merely reacting to them after the fact. She established a proper preventive maintenance schedule that first season, checking safety systems and other critical components on a regular rotation rather than waiting for an inspector's finding to reveal a problem that could have been caught months earlier. 11 farms kept their harvest window because you happened to be walking through this county on exactly the wrong morning. Otis told Sable some months later, watching the elevator's legs cycle smoothly through another truck's worth of grain. I don't think I'll ever stop being grateful for that particular coincidence, however unlikely it seemed at the time. Delmar Osei stopped by more than once that season as well. Bringing produce from his own farm as a standing thanks, he insisted on continuing regardless of Sable's own protests that it wasn't necessary. "You kept this whole operation running for 11 of us," he told her one afternoon. "I don't think a few vegetables properly repays that, but it's what I've got to offer, and I intend to keep offering it." His own sons took to stopping by occasionally as well, curious about the mechanism they'd helped repair that first frantic day, and Sable found herself, more than once, walking them through the elevator's basic operation, with the same patient attention her own father had once shown her at a similar age. Sable thought, some evenings that season, about the 9 months of towns and consolidation notices that had led her to a state inspector's vehicle parked beside a loading dock on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and understood, watching the elevator's operations continue smoothly through harvest after harvest that followed, that she had found, at the end of that unsettled stretch, exactly the kind of purpose she'd feared she might never find again. Not simply steady work, but the particular privilege of arriving with exactly the hours needed, and making every single one of them count for 11 families who would never fully know how close their entire harvest had come to sitting with nowhere to go. She wrote to her own father that season, describing the elevator and the 24-hour deadline and the whole strange sequence of events that had led a routine equipment check to become, in the end, exactly the kind of steady purpose she'd feared she might never find again after the consolidation ended her own maintenance career. His reply came a few weeks later, brief but proud in the particular way Sable remembered him always being. "Told you a good elevator technician's respect for safety systems would find use somewhere, whatever the co-op decided about needing it anymore. Proud of you for refusing to rush a repair that mattered this much, even with the clock running out on 11 families' entire season." So, here's the question worth sitting with tonight. How many entire communities' worth of livelihood depend on a single piece of aging safety equipment, one inspection away from a shutdown that could idle an entire season's harvest? And what does it take? 24 hours. A foreman willing to call every farmer who depends on the operation, a stranger who understood exactly which repair actually mattered, for 11 harvests to keep moving instead of sitting stranded. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Salvage Line for more, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight.